You just moved $1,000. Maybe it's sitting in your account right now. Maybe you already did it, last month, last year, 5 years ago. Maybe you're still deciding. But at some point, you had $1,000 and you made a choice about what to do with it. And right now, depending on that one choice, that $1,000 is either working for you in ways that will quietly change your life, or it's already gone. Not stolen. Not wasted dramatically. Just gone. Dissolved into a life that looks exactly the same as it did before you had it. That feeling you just got reading that? Hold on to it. Because that's what this is about. My name is Semzi, and I've spent years studying why some people use money to build lives they actually want, and why others, people who are just as smart, just as hardworking, sometimes even earning more, end up in the exact same place decade after decade. I'm not here to give you a budgeting spreadsheet. I'm not here to tell you to cut your coffee. I'm here to show you something most financial content won't touch, because it's not comfortable, and it's not simple, and it requires you to sit with some things about yourself that you'd rather not look at directly. If that sounds like something you can handle, stay with me. And before we go any further, if nobody in your life is having this kind of conversation with you about money, that's exactly why this channel exists. Subscribe. Turn on notifications. Because what we're building here is not a highlight reel. It's a mirror. Now, let's talk about $1,000. Here's where most people are right now with money. Not broke in the dramatic sense. Not wealthy in the obvious sense. Just suspended. Existing in this financial middle space where there's enough to get by, not enough to feel free, and a persistent low hum of anxiety that never fully goes away. You know the sound. It's there when you check your account before a purchase you already know you're going to make. It's there on the first of the month when the rent clears and you watch the number drop and you think, okay, I'm fine, but the thought completes itself with a question mark. It's there when someone mentions investing and you feel that flash, part interest, part shame, because you've meant to figure that out for a while now and somehow the right moment never arrived. 3 years ago, you said next year. 2 years ago, you said when things settle down. Last year, you said when I get that raise. This year, you're still saying something. And here's the thing nobody talks about, the subscription you forgot you had that charged you again this month. That's not the problem. The problem is that somewhere along the way, money became something that happened to you instead of something you directed. You react to it. You respond to it. You're in a constant state of financial defense, and you're exhausted, and you don't even fully realize it because exhausted has started to feel normal. Think about the last time you saw something you wanted, a trip, a course, a piece of clothing, a version of your life that seemed possible for someone else, and your first thought wasn't, how do I get that, but, I can't afford that. Not, I'm choosing not to prioritize that right now. Not, that's not where my money is going. Just, I can't afford it. The language of someone who has no agency. And you said it so fast, so automatically, that you didn't even notice the story buried inside it. Research from Princeton University found that the mental bandwidth consumed by financial stress is equivalent to losing an entire night's sleep, and that's every day, every week, every month for people living in a state of financial scarcity. It doesn't just make you sad. It literally impairs your cognitive function. It makes you worse at making decisions, including financial decisions. It is, in the cruelest possible way, self-reinforcing. You're stressed about money, so you make worse decisions about money, so you become more stressed about money. And you've been operating inside that loop, at least partially, for longer than you want to admit. The retirement calculator you opened 6 months ago and then quietly closed, that wasn't laziness. That was self-protection. Because the numbers scared you and it was easier to not know than to know and feel powerless. The investment account you almost opened twice. The savings goal you announced to yourself in January and quietly stopped thinking about by March. These aren't character flaws. They're symptoms. And the cause is something we need to talk about. Because here's what nobody told you about the financial system you were born into. It was not designed to make you wealthy. It was designed to make you a reliable consumer. And it is extraordinarily good at its job. Think about when you first started earning money. Nobody sat you down and explained compound interest in a way that made you feel it in your chest. Nobody showed you what 30 years of consistent investing looks like at a cellular level. Nobody explained the difference between an asset and a liability in language that connected to your real life. What you got instead was a debit card, a bank account that pays you 0.01% interest while lending your money out at 20%, and a culture that celebrated spending as a form of self-expression. You weren't taught to build wealth. You were taught to participate in an economy. Those are not the same thing. And then lifestyle inflation crept in so quietly you didn't feel it move. When you were earning less, you were surviving. When you started earning more, you started living better, which sounds like progress, and felt like progress, but the gap between what you earned and what you kept never actually widened. It just moved up. You upgraded the apartment. You upgraded the car. You upgraded the phone, the wardrobe, the restaurants, the subscriptions. And your expenses grew with your income like they were joined at the hip, because nobody ever told you they didn't have to. A study from the University of Michigan found that Americans consistently overestimate how much their happiness will increase when their income rises, and simultaneously underestimate how quickly they adapt to a higher standard of living, resetting their baseline and wanting more. It's called the hedonic treadmill. You run harder. The treadmill speeds up. You end up in the same place, just more tired. This is not your fault. But it is now your responsibility. Because you're watching this, which means some part of you already knows something has to change. And what happens next is the part most people miss. There's a man, let's call him Marcus, who made $200,000 a year for 11 years. By every external measure, Marcus was doing well. Nice house. Good car. Private school for the kids. Vacations that looked beautiful on camera. And when Marcus was laid off at 43, he had less than 60 days of expenses saved. 11 years. $2.2 million earned. And 60 days to survive on. Where did it go? Not to drugs, not to gambling, not to anything dramatic. It went to a lifestyle that cost exactly as much as he made. Every raise got absorbed immediately. Every bonus had already been promised to something before it arrived. Marcus wasn't irresponsible by any normal measure. He just never learned the difference between earning money and building wealth. He confused income with security. And the moment the income stopped, so did everything else. Now think about what Marcus could have done with just one of those bonuses. Invested properly. Let alone years of them. This is where it gets interesting. Because the conversation we need to have isn't about Marcus's salary. It's about what he did, or didn't do, with $1,000. But here's what nobody tells you about money. The gap between investing $1,000 wrong and investing it right isn't just a gap in returns. It's a gap in who you become in the process. And that is the thing that changes everything. Most people think about investing as a math problem. Put money in, get more money out, pick the highest number. But the research tells a completely different story. A landmark study from Dalbar, a financial research firm out of Boston, found that over a 20-year period, the average investor earned significantly less than the market itself returned, not because the market failed them, but because of the decisions they made inside it. The market delivered roughly 10% annually. The average investor? Under 3%. Same opportunity. Radically different outcome. Because of behavior, not because of luck. The wealthy don't have access to different markets. They have a different relationship with time, with risk, and with their own psychology. And that relationship sometimes it starts, with what they do with $1,000. So let's get specific. And I want you to really sit with this. The first principle. Money invested in the wrong vehicle doesn't just grow slowly, it actually destroys wealth in ways that are invisible until it's too late. Here's what most people do. They save. They put money in a savings account because it feels responsible. It feels safe. And safety is seductive, especially when money has always felt precarious. The bank account says high yield and offers you 2.5%, maybe 4% in a good year, and that feels like something. You're earning interest. You're being responsible. You're doing better than the person who spent it. But here's the invisible cost. Inflation, the actual, historical average inflation rate in the United States over the last century, runs at approximately 3 to 4% annually, according to data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Which means if your savings account is giving you 2% and inflation is running at 3.5%, you are not gaining money in real terms. You are losing it. Slowly. Quietly. While your account balance technically goes up, your purchasing power is going down. You are working to stand still. The Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis has published extensive research showing that the average savings account has failed to keep pace with inflation for most of the last 2 decades. Most people don't know this. They see a growing number and assume growth. But the number is lying to them. Now put that same $1,000 in a diversified index fund, something that simply tracks the broad market, nothing exotic, nothing complicated, and the historical average annual return, according to data analyzed by Vanguard and confirmed by decades of academic research from institutions including Yale University School of Management, sits at approximately 9 to 10% annually over any 30-year rolling period. $1,000 at 10% for 30 years. No additional contributions. Just time. That's $17,400. The same $1,000 in a savings account at 2% for 30 years? $1,811. Same 1,000. Same 30 years. $15,000 of difference. From one decision. Made once. Now multiply that decision by every bonus, every tax refund, every unexpected windfall you've had in the last decade and quietly put somewhere that felt safe. And sit with that number for a moment. The second principle. The enemy of your financial future is not your income. It's your identity. And this one is harder to hear. There's a woman, let's call her Diane, who grew up in a household where money was always a source of tension. Not dramatic poverty, but the kind of financial uncertainty that puts a low hum of anxiety underneath everything. Where you learn, very early, that money is scarce, that spending is relief, that wanting expensive things is for other kinds of people. Diane grew up, started earning good money, and made all the right moves, on paper. She opened an investment account. She read the books. She followed the advice. But every time the market dipped slightly, she felt a physical panic and moved her money to cash. Every time she started to build a cushion, something inside her found a reason to spend it, a generous gift, a home upgrade, a justification that always sounded reasonable. She wasn't sabotaging herself consciously. She was acting out a belief she didn't even know she held. That she wasn't the kind of person who had money. That security was for someone else. Researchers at The Ohio State University studying financial behavior found that people's money decisions are overwhelmingly driven not by logic or information, but by what they call financial identity, the unconscious story they carry about what kind of person they are and what kind of person has money. And those stories, formed largely in childhood, override rational knowledge constantly. This is why you can know intellectually that you should invest and still not do it. This is why you can watch 10 videos about budgeting and still overspend. The information isn't the problem. The identity is. The question isn't what you know about money. The question is who you believe you are around it. Because here's the truth about every person who has ever built lasting wealth from ordinary income, and there are thousands of them, studied extensively by researchers at Emory University and documented in Dr. Thomas Stanley's landmark work, The Millionaire Next Door. They don't have a different strategy. They have a different self-concept. They see themselves as someone who keeps money. Someone who sends dollars somewhere with intention. Someone for whom delayed gratification is not deprivation but power. That identity shift is not comfortable. But it is the actual work. And what happens next is the part most people miss. The third principle. Every dollar you invest is a decision about your future self, and most people are making that decision by default. Think about what it actually means to not invest $1,000. It doesn't mean you kept it. It means you spent it, because that's what happens to money that has no direction. It flows into the path of least resistance, which in a consumer economy means it flows outward, toward experiences and objects and small comforts that feel good in the moment and leave no trace. And there's nothing wrong with comfort. But comfort purchased with capital that could have compounded is a trade. An expensive trade that you're making without realizing you're making it. Harvard Business School researchers studying investment behavior and happiness found something deeply counterintuitive. People who invested money, even modest amounts, reported significantly higher life satisfaction over time than people who spent the same amount on experiential purchases. Not because deprivation makes you happy, but because watching your wealth build, slowly and steadily, creates something that money spent can never create, evidence to yourself that you are someone who builds. Every time you invest, you are voting for your future self. Every time you don't, you are quietly canceling that vote. $1,000 invested at 25. Left alone at 10% annual growth. By 65, that's $45,000. Without touching it. Without thinking about it. Without doing anything except making one decision in your mid-20s and having the patience to let time do its job. Most people spend $1,000 in April and forget about it by May. The fourth principle, and this one lands differently than the others. Time is the most expensive thing you will ever waste. Not because of inspiration. Because of mathematics. A study published in the Journal of Financial Economics, drawing on 50 years of market data, demonstrated that the single most powerful variable in wealth accumulation for ordinary investors is not intelligence, not income, not even investment selection. It is the age at which they start and the consistency with which they continue. Nothing else comes close. Let me give you the number that changed how I think about this. 2 people. Both invest in the same fund at the same return rate. Person A invests $1,000 a month starting at 25. Person B starts at 35. Person A stops at 35, invests for 10 years, then never touches it again. Person B invests from 35 to 65. 30 years, consistently, every month. Who has more at 65? Person A. The one who stopped 30 years earlier. Because the 10 years between 25 and 35 are worth more, mathematically, than the 30 years between 35 and 65. Those 10 early years, because of compounding, produce an outcome that 30 later years cannot match. That is not a metaphor. That is arithmetic. And it is the most important math lesson nobody ever taught you. Every year you wait is not just a year lost. It is a multiplier removed from every dollar that follows. But here's something darker underneath this. Your lifestyle, the specific shape of your spending, the subscriptions, the upgrades, the things you buy because everyone around you buys them, is, in very large part, someone else's marketing budget at work. This is not a conspiracy theory. It is the stated, documented goal of a $400 billion advertising industry in the United States alone, per data from the Statista Research Department. The entire machinery of consumer culture is engineered, with extraordinary precision and psychological sophistication, to make you feel that your current life is insufficient and that spending will resolve that feeling. It won't. You know this. But it keeps working. Because the feeling it targets is real. The inadequacy is real. The desire for a better life is real. It just redirects those real feelings toward purchases rather than toward the actual things that build the life you want. And every dollar that flows out in response to that feeling is a dollar that is not compounding. That is not building. That is not becoming the 45,000 that started as 1,000 and was left alone. You are one medical emergency away from financial collapse not because of bad luck but because somewhere, a long series of small spending decisions were made that felt fine in the moment, and the cushion never got built. According to research from the Federal Reserve's annual report on the economic well-being of U.S. households, 40% of American adults cannot cover an unexpected $400 expense without borrowing or selling something. 40%. Not 40% of low-income earners. 40% of American adults. And most of them are not one major financial mistake away from that reality. They are 1,000 unexamined dollars away from beginning to leave it behind. So here's where we land. Not with a step-by-step plan. Not with a tidy conclusion. With a choice. Because all of this, the Marcus story, the Diane story, the math that makes your chest tighten, it all resolves into this single moment, right here, which is the moment where you decide what to do with what you now know. Path 1. You leave this video and it joins every other piece of financial content you've consumed and found meaningful and then not acted on. The week continues. The month continues. The $1,000, when it arrives in whatever form it arrives, gets absorbed into the life as it currently exists. Not because you're irresponsible. Because a decision that doesn't change behavior is not really a decision. It's just thinking. 5 years from now, that path looks exactly like this one. Maybe slightly more anxious. Maybe slightly more aware of the gap between where you are and where you wanted to be. The awareness without the action becomes its own kind of pain. Path 2 is less comfortable, not because it requires more money but because it requires a different relationship with yourself. It requires deciding, actually deciding, that you are someone who keeps money, grows money, thinks about money as a tool rather than something to be endured. It requires sitting with some discomfort now to reduce a much larger discomfort later. It doesn't require perfection. It requires a start. $1,000 in the right place. Today. Not next month when things settle. Not next year when you have more. Today, with what you have, in whatever amount is available to you. Because here's the thing about the people who actually do this, the ones who end up at 65 with options, with peace, with choices their peers don't have, they don't have a secret. They don't have more discipline or more intelligence or a better spreadsheet. They just started. And then they didn't stop. And time did the rest. The question is not whether you understand this now. You do. The question is whether you'll still understand it tomorrow, when the understanding is less comfortable and something shiny is calling from a different direction. Nobody's coming to fix this for you. Your move. If this hit different than what you expected, you're not alone. Drop in the comments, what's the one thing you've been waiting on? The one money move you keep telling yourself you'll make when the time is right? Say it out loud here. That's where it starts. Subscribe if you're not already on the channel. Because this is the kind of conversation we have here, not what you want to hear, but what you actually need to. Semzi out.